I'd like to introduce Alyssa Ford Morel, who wears lots of different hats. She grew up in a gardening family in California, and in fact, her sister has joined us from there, which is wonderful. She lives in Arlington, where she volunteers as an extension master gardener and a master naturalist. She also serves as one of the coordinators of the Glen Carlin Library Demonstration Garden and as an Audubon at Home ambassador. Alyssa, welcome.
Thank you so much. And without further ado, let's just get going here and talk for a moment about what we are going to be talking about during this presentation. We're going to start with a word about biodiversity, which is really at the heart of this presentation. We are going to be looking at 7 different creatures. And the truth is that the only thing these creatures have in common, other than being around us here in Northern Virginia, is the fact that I think these are all really cool animals, and was interested in learning more about them myself, and hopefully you will enjoy learning more about them. With each of these creatures, I'm going to be discussing habitat supporting practices that you can use that will help these animals in their lives. And I will also, for each of them, be trying to recommend some specific plants that will be supportive of them. I'm just going to point out this wonderful photo of the blueberry diggerbee on a blueberry blossom and say this is one of the great examples about why plant and animal interactions are so important. I heard a great story about how blueberry farmers for a long time were bringing in honeybees to try to pollinate, and they couldn't figure out why the honeybees were not doing a great job of pollinating. And it's because the blueberries have a very special structure where they don't release their pollen unless there is a very specific frequency of a buzz to release that pollen. And it turns out that there's blueberry bees that have that exact buzz frequency. And so when those bees are trying to pollinate the blueberries, they're incredibly efficient, whereas these generalist honeybees are not. This is why diversity is really important in so many ways. There's been a lot of attention on the climate crisis, as well there should be. But a lot of people who should know also say the biodiversity crisis is just as big of a deal. It's hard to quantify the biodiversity crisis when we don't even know how many species of animals we have on Earth. We usually say about 8.7 million species, but it varies greatly. And the fact of the matter is that species are disappearing before we even have a chance to identify them way too often. And when a species disappears that we don't even know, we don't have a chance to learn from that species. There's so much that the animal world can offer to us in terms of knowledge about mechanics and medicine and chemistry, and we're losing them very, very quickly before we even get to know who they are or what they can offer us or what the important role is that they play in the environment. Some of the latest estimates say that wildlife figures have plunged by an average of 69% between 1970 and 2018. That's a huge amount of life that is gone from the earth. The United Nations say that there are 5 main drivers of loss, and it's worth taking a look at what those are. Changes in land and sea use, exploitation of natural resources, global heating, pollution, and the spread of invasive species, which take over the place of the non-invasive species wherever they are. There are a couple of metaphors that have helped me understand why this is important, and I want to take just a moment and share them with you. I won't do as good a job as the 2 gentlemen who originated these metaphors, but I'm going to try my best. Entomologist Dr. Douglas Tallamy talks about our environment being a great big airplane. And that airplane is composed of many different parts. They're all hooked up to each other. And those parts all in total keep the plane flying. But parts start coming loose and dropping off. And often it's just a little nut that, may hold on a not very important screw. And we can lose a certain number of smaller parts, and the plane can still be flying okay. But we don't know which nut and which bolt are going to be key. And suddenly the plane is no longer structurally sound. So that's that metaphor. Alonso Abogadas, who is here in Arlington, and those of you who know him know what a wonderful speaker he is, and have probably heard his jigsaw puzzle metaphor, which is that any local ecosystem is like a jigsaw puzzle. And as a naturalist, we look at what all those different pieces are. There's different animals, there's different plants, there's water and soil, and each piece is a part of the big picture. But that picture starts disappearing when we start losing those pieces. And it's much harder to build the jigsaw puzzle when you don't have all the pieces. It's even harder when other pieces from other puzzles have been dropped in. And now you have to try to fit those pieces in. And they may not be the right design, the right size, or shape. And so those are a couple of images to keep in mind as we talk about why each of these creatures is important. I am giving this talk based on the idea that it is really important that we work on this problem starting in our own yards. Our yard can be a universe to so many small creatures, and certainly to the plants that live in our yards. There's so many creatures that will never, ever even get outside of our yards. And so what we do in our yard make a huge difference to them. And I find that a very empowering and happy thought. So let's get started on our first creature, which are fireflies, or sometimes they're called lightning bugs. And the thing is that they are neither bugs nor flies, which are themselves orders in the greater insect world. But in fact, they are beetles. And the beetles are the biggest group of species in the world. There's over 400 different species, and they are in great part distinguished by the fact that they have two pairs of wings. The outer wings are hard and they're called elytra, and they cover up the very delicate hind wings or underwings that are used for flying. Specifically speaking of fireflies, there's over 2,000 species worldwide, with more than 150 species in North America. And here in the DC area, we've got about 36 kinds of fireflies. Now, I did not grow up being familiar with fireflies. I heard about them, but I didn't see them because I grew up in California. And most of the fireflies west of the Rocky Mountains don't light up, although there are a few, and they can be called daytime fireflies or black fireflies. The most common fireflies in both North America and our area are Photinius piralis, the Big Dipper firefly. And the Big Dipper refers to the shape of their flight as they light up. Now, as I already said, not all fireflies glow, but all species of fireflies glow when they are eggs, larvae, and pupa. We don't see that a lot because that is when they are underground, which we'll come to in a moment. The glowing is an important thing in two ways. First of all, because it helps the adult fireflies attract each other for mating, but it also warns predators that they don't taste good and in fact can be bad for any predators who would try to eat them. Different species have different colors and different flashing patterns, different places where they flash, and times that they display. Our Big Dipper firefly tends to display in the twilight, and that's why we see them so often before we go indoors for the night. So they have interesting life cycles. The glowworms are completely predatory and they live in the ground, feeding on earthworms, slugs, and snails primarily. So if you have problems with slugs and snails in your garden, you may want to make sure that you've got lots of fireflies around. It takes them about 2 years to reach maturity. So they are under there eating away. The adult fireflies lay their eggs in moist soil, preferably with some leaf matter around that will help keep that soil moist. The eggs hatch within 2 weeks and they start crawling into the ground and they spend all this time eating. Their light, if they get dug up, it's usually kind of dark in that, little hole that has been dug to find them. And so their little glow, even in daytime, makes a difference. It shows the predator, oh, this is something kind of weird. It's lighting up. Now, here's one of the things that I found most amazing. The adult fireflies, for the most part, do not eat or sleep. They have rather short lives, and they are all about reproduction once they reach the adult stage. Once they mate, many of the male fireflies transfer with the sperm a nutrient-rich substance called the nuptial gift, which I find really quite interesting. So, are fireflies endangered? And as I dug into this question, I realized that there's not all that many scientists studying fireflies. And in fact, a couple of the biggest researchers, Sarah Lewis and Sunny Wong, published this article in 2020 saying that we know the numbers of fireflies are declining, but we really don't have a lot of good information on fireflies worldwide. A couple other studies, one of them estimated that of 128 species studied in North America, about 11% are threatened with extinction, and a different assessment said that 1 in 3 species in North America may be at risk of extinction. So what I have to say is clearly more study is needed, but we need to start helping these creatures now. And one of the ways that we can all help is by participating in citizen science for the fireflies. There's 2 different places that track them, and I've got the links here, and there should be live links on the handout that were sent to you. Citizen science has really taken a huge jump in recent years. There's been a lot more done for more than 100 years. There's been the Christmas bird count, which has given us some wonderful information about birds. And more recently, eBird, an online program that allows individuals to record their sightings, has created the most successful example of natural big data. And so there are organizations that are trying to mimic that for other species. So anything you can do can really help. What can we do to help the fireflies? We need to recognize what the threats are. First of all, there's habitat loss, particularly to the larvae and pupa who, as we said, live in the soil and need to have really organic, rich, and moist soil. Another really big issue is light pollution. Fireflies at night think that the brightest light in the sky is the moon. They do not understand street lights and house lights and that sort of thing, and they can get disoriented by other lights. It also makes it difficult to see the flashes when there's too much light. Pesticides are a very big deal for fireflies. They are susceptible to most insecticides, including the ones that you use just on your lawn or you think are just for mosquitoes. Those pesticides will kill the fireflies. Climate change is also creating problems because the more dry conditions we have, the less those larvae are able to thrive. Remember, they need a moist organic habitat. And in fact, that is why here in the DC area, just this past season, we didn't have a great firefly season because, as you may remember, right before fireflies were supposed to be coming out, we had this really hot, dry period that probably killed off a number of those fireflies just before they would have started their display. We can help the fireflies by, for one thing, when we mow, be very mindful. They tend to, during the day, crawl up the grass to the tip, and you can see that here. Here's a little guy on the tip of the grass waiting to move into a display. And so if you can keep your blades high and mow earlier in the day, that can help. You won't be killing the fireflies as they're hanging out on the tips of the grass. Also, just keeping your lawns taller will help the moisture level be higher. You can leave leaf litter and other woody debris as habitat. Again, that all builds the moisture in the soil. Also, avoid disturbing the soil. We've learned in so many ways that no-till gardening is good for all sorts of reasons. And here we learned that all those baby fireflies are not going to be happy when their ground is turned over. We can turn out the lights if you are worried about bad people coming to your house. Use motion detectors or timers, and always use the lowest amount of light needed. If it's possible to use a colored light, red lights are the least disturbing to the fireflies. Planting highly supportive keystone plants that help the environment generally will really help out, especially the trees which are so important for holding moisture and reducing temperatures. We've heard a lot about the urban heat island effect recently, and so any place that has more trees is going to be cooler in general and able to hold moisture for longer. So that brings us to what trees do we want to think about? And I want to suggest, if you're not familiar with this concept of keystone plants, that this is a really important thing to understand. They are named keystone plants because they play the important supportive role that the keystone in a Roman arch played, where the rest of the arch can be well constructed, but without that keystone, the arch will not stand. Not all native plants support wildlife equally. While native plants are all a good thing, the fact of the matter is that 75% of insect food is created by just a few plant genera. And as Douglas Tallamy, the entomologist who has done so much research in this area, has written, he said, a yard without keystone plants will fall far short of the insect abundance necessary to sustain viable food webs, even if dozens of native plant genera are present. I am going to tell you about the top of our keystone arch, and that is the white oaks. The oaks are divided into two different families, red and white. The trees in the oak family in general in America support more than 530 different kinds of Lepidoptera. In case you're not familiar with the term Lepidoptera, Lepidoptera means butterflies, moths, and skippers. The reason that it matters how many Lepidoptera are supported is because caterpillars, baby Lepidoptera, are the main thing that so many creatures eat in the food chain. And so a world without caterpillars is pretty much a world without other kinds of creatures, because they are right there at the bottom of the food chain. We have a number of white oaks that live in Northern Virginia naturally, including the swamp white oak, the chinquapin oak, the overcup oak, the chestnut oak, the post oak, and the northern white oak. This is an interesting tidbit that blue jays plant more acorns than squirrels do. They plant about 5,000 acorns every year. And there are cultivars of oaks for small yards. So if you think, oh, an oak is too big, I can't put it in my yard is too small, you can research what white oaks might be available in your area. And here is a list of keystone plants in case oak is not the tree that you want to put in. And this is not the list for everyone. This is the list for me because it's based on a zip code. I went to this site, the National Wildlife Federation's Native Plants Finder, and this is in your handout as a live link. That spot lets you put in your zip code and generates the list of which keystone species are the top for your area. So it differs from place to place. Probably if you're in Arlington, it won't be much different than the one that I have because you're very close by. But the further away you are, the more it may vary. So I encourage you to take a look. It's wonderful, easy information. Until we had stuff like this available, you would have had to research all over the place and might have been difficult to figure out what the top Lepidoptera supporting plants were, but now it's at the touch of your fingertips. Let's move on to our next creature. I don't think I've ever met a person who does not like hummingbirds. They are wonderful, wonderful creatures and quite fascinating. There are more than 300 species of hummingbirds, all in the Western Hemisphere. They do not exist in the Eastern Hemisphere. There are other birds that fill that niche, but no actual hummingbirds that live there in the wild. We have 17 species of hummingbirds that nest in the United States, but only ruby-throated hummingbirds are found in the eastern United States. Occasionally, we get a vagrant that migrates in the wrong direction from the West Coast. And that's always a really big deal for birders when they show up. But mostly what we have is ruby-throated hummingbirds. Hummingbirds must consume approximately a half of its weight every day, and they feed 5 to 8 times an hour. We think of them as being nectar eaters, which of course is true. They really like the nectar and the sugar gives them a lot of quick energy, but they also need protein and they eat many small insects and spiders. And they can also sip tree sap or juice if they can find a broken fruit. This is a migration map that I find really fascinating because our ruby-throated hummingbirds are migratory birds. They live in Central America. And even though they weigh less than a nickel, they make the most amazing migration. The ones who live in the eastern part of Central America migrate over 500 miles over the Gulf of Mexico to make it to North America. And there are no resting spots for them. They do this, it takes them 18 to 24 hours, and they do it all in one fell swoop. I do not know how they do it, but I do know that when they arrive in North America, wherever they hit land, they are exhausted and desperate for some replenishment of food. They have a lot of fidelity to the same area that they were in the year before, and they spread out. Some of them, when they hit North America, they only fly a little ways and then they stop, and that's where they're going to stay for the breeding season, and that's likely where they'll come back to every year. But other ones go further north and further north and further north. So of course Virginia is here, and so we get the hummingbirds that make it. Usually the migration map says that the birds in that area are arriving April 1 to 15. It's really mid-April before there's enough of them that we start really noticing them and reporting them. Baby hummingbirds need a high protein diet, including insects, and their parents will catch mosquitoes and gnats and aphids and caterpillars to feed those babies. And what the parents do is they eat those, and it's combined with nectar, and then the parent regurgitates the food into the chicks' mouths, feeding them for nearly a month. And if you've ever had the chance to see this happen, either live or on video, it is amazing because it looks like those babies are swallowing swords. Those beaks of their parents going down their gullets it's amazing that it actually works, but it clearly does. After the babies have fledged and are able to feed themselves, there's what's known as the post-breeding dispersal, where the hummingbirds who were really just staying in wherever it is that they had their nest fly and start looking around more and covering a broader area. And I know that that's true in our yard. We unfortunately have not had any hummingbird nests in our yard. We hope that someday our yard will be attractive enough to attract a hummingbird that thinks it's a good nesting spot. But we get a lot of hummingbirds starting in earliest late July, but right now we're getting the hummingbirds pretty frequently. So we're happy to be able to get them during that time. It is a tricky place for hummingbirds. They are so tiny and they have such unusual needs. They can be brought down by strong winds or downpours. And so trees and shrubs that can provide shelter are really important to them. And in fact, this is the bird that comes into our fringe tree routinely. We know that the hummingbirds, and I'm not sure if it's one or more than one hummingbird, but our fringe tree is quite dense and the hummingbird will always land there first and check things out and then fly on to whatever it wants to do, usually getting nectar, and then stops again at the tree to rest for a moment before it leaves our yard. The number one predator of hummingbirds is cats, domestic cats that are loose. And the number two is the Chinese mantis, but other creatures will also predate on them if they can get them. And sometimes hummingbirds can get caught in spider webs. Crows will eat both the eggs and the babies if they are available. Big problem for hummingbirds is pesticides that poison the food that they need to eat and feed their babies, the mosquitoes and so forth. Sugar water in feeders can also be a problem. We all love to feed the hummingbirds and they're wonderful to watch. And if you get a lot of hummingbirds, it's kind of fun to watch them chase each other off. But the problem is that particularly in the heat, the sugar water can be a real problem. It'll ferment, and fermented sugar water is not good for them. Bacteria and black mold can really be a problem. So if you use feeders, it is really important that you change the nectar every 1 to 5 days, depending on how hot it is. If it's really hot, you should be changing the nectar and cleaning the feeder every single day. Cooler weather, you can go a little bit longer, but cleaning that feeder is important. Soap and water is the best. Be sure that you rinse really, really well. Do not use a sugar substitute. There is nothing better for them in this case than actual sugar. But better than all of that is having native plants as feeders. And we have a number of native plants in Northern Virginia that are going to be sure to attract hummingbirds, and these are some of them. I want to point out that the great blue lobelia and the cardinal flower can both take some shade. So if you've got a shady yard, do not despair and think that you can't have any hummingbirds. Plant some of those, they'll probably come. The phlox is a great plant, and we have quite a bit of phlox now at the Glen Carlin Library Garden where I'm a coordinator, and I see them at the phlox all the time, in addition to the coral honeysuckle, which is a big attractor. And I just want to feature that as a plant that is almost a guarantee that you will get hummingbirds visiting if you've got a big plant that blooms a lot. They are big plants when they're happy. They can grow to be up to 20 feet high. So don't put it in without planning a little bit. The flowers are very pretty. They're red with a yellow center, and the name Lonicera sempervirens. Sempervirens means semi-evergreen. So they can look pretty nice even through the winter. If that is too big of a plant, there is a cultivar that was found in Virginia called John Clayton, a naturally occurring cultivar that has a smaller height and spread, and the flowers are all yellow. So maybe you prefer all yellow, maybe you prefer a smaller size, but that would potentially work for you. They like a lot of sun. They'll grow in the shade, but not flower as much in the shade. And they do need the moisture. They really need some sort of support, but they're hosts of a couple of different kinds of moths. And there is a tried and true fact sheet about Lonicera sempervirens available at the MGNV website. So we've got ladybugs, and who doesn't love ladybugs? This is something that I think everybody has an affection for. Most insects have some detractors, but really, I don't know anybody who says, oh, I don't like ladybugs. There are more than 5,000 species of ladybugs in the world. We usually call them ladybugs in North America, but in Great Britain, they're called ladybirds. Scientists tend to call them lady beetles, and they are in that same beetle family as the fireflies. And they have the hard outer wing, the elytra, and the smaller tissue-like flight wing that you can see on this one that's underneath. Of the more than 450 species found in North America, 12 call Virginia home. And most ladybugs are considered beneficial, both as adults and larvae, and I would say almost more so as larvae, because their preferred food is aphids. And very, very few people will say anything great in support of aphids, except that they are great food source for so many insects. They also eat mites and scale insects and thrips, none of which gardeners like. But again, we all are quite comfortable with them and like them because we were introduced to them as children. And, there's all sorts of artwork that shows cute little ladybugs. I did find this really fascinating that over a lifetime, a ladybug can eat nearly 5,000 aphids. So that's a lot of aphids out of our gardens. Let's look at their life cycle. They start as eggs, and I think it's so clever. The parents often try to lay their eggs near where there are a lot of aphids so that as soon as the babies hatch out, they'll have something to start munching on. Smart thinking on the part of those ladybug parents. After hatching, the larvae go through 4 instar stages. And instar simply is a stage of development. After each instar, they shed their skin and come out a little bit bigger. These are baby ladybugs, the ladybug instars, and they look kind of like alligators. I had for a long time thought they looked kind of like alligators. And then as I was researching this, I found numerous references saying they look kind of like alligators. So I thought, okay, I'm not crazy. They look like alligators. Each larva looks different depending on which kind of larva it is. And then after the last larval instar stage, it attaches itself to a leaf to pupate, which doesn't last very long, 3 to 12 days. And then the adults come out and they have a lifespan, depending on circumstances and the kind of ladybug that they are, of a few months to over a year. The adults overwinter below the leaf litter under rocks and bark, and they flock together to mate and lay eggs. And then they hibernate until spring, living off their fat reserves. So where have we heard this before about leaf litter and rocks and bark being important? I'm going to give you a secret. It's not the last time we'll hear it. We unfortunately have some problem ladybugs that are becoming more and more common in our area. Asian multicolored lady beetles, and you can see these different lady beetles. These are all the same kind of lady beetle, but they turn out to be quite different colors. They started to be imported to North America in 1916 for pest control. And I have to admit that I, in the past, have bought live ladybugs to release because I had aphids, and I thought this is the best natural way to get rid of the aphids. Well, those captured ladybugs that are sold are almost always the Asian ones. And it started to become a bit of a problem because these ladybugs are highly successful predators. And when they run out of what they want, they can move on to human fruit crops, which can be a problem, particularly for vineyards and so forth. It's an issue. They are slightly larger than most of our native varieties, and they can be smelly because they have a defensive mechanism where they release a stinky yellow fluid. And without any natural predators, their populations have expanded greatly. And as those populations have expanded since the 1990s, there have been increasing stories of these Asian multicolored lady beetles invading homes and other buildings during winter. They flock together and huge numbers of them will come into the home, and combined with the fact that they can make a stinky smell, this is not something that people are finding cute or charming. And so the advice is, if this happens, that you need to seal up entry points and vacuum up the intruders. The advice is often to get a stocking and put it over your hose and let the hose suck them into the stocking, and then you have a stocking full of them and you can throw them out that way. It's unclear how much the success of Asian multicolored ladybugs will impact native species, which have declining populations. It's not an agreed fact that the Asian lady beetles are actually causing the decline, but many scientists do believe that that competition is already hurting our native populations. If you want to identify them, the best way to do that is that they all have this pattern on what kind of feels like their forehead of spots that can either connect up like this one is, or they can stay spots, but they're in the same order to look like a W or an M, depending on which way you're looking at them. The instars, the younger ones, have this kind of rectangular pattern on their abdomen, or the back of their abdomen, I guess I should say. What can we do to help ladybugs? First of all, ladybugs are killed by pesticides. And not only are they killed by pesticides, but even if you don't get it on the ladybug, they are predators. And if you kill all the aphids, they are going to starve to death. And it is impossible to distinguish when you are putting out an insecticide which is the prey and which is the predator. You can see here, how could you possibly target all these aphids and not get the ladybug? Insecticides are also a big problem for songbirds, who 96% of songbirds feed their babies protein. And in fact, the big reason that birds come to North America is because of the abundance of insects that allow them to raise more babies in the Western Hemisphere, in the northern part of the Western Hemisphere. All those birds that migrate up here need protein and fat to fuel their journey here and to feed their babies. Pesticides kill life not only on plants, but they kill it in the soil. This is one I feel really is important to explain. There is a lot of misunderstanding about pesticides. People think that there are pesticides which, because of their organic nature or who knows what, are going to be okay for the good bugs and bad for the bad ones. And there is no such distinguishing factor. In fact, most of the commercially used pesticides that most of the mosquito spraying companies use are based on chrysanthemums. It is a very organic, natural product, but the fact of the matter is pretty much all of our chemicals come from someplace. They come from some organic basis. And I promise you that chemical that's in the chrysanthemum will kill both the good insects and the bad insects. Fungicides can be just as bad of a problem, so be careful with those. What we urge you to do is to cultivate natural controls, ladybugs being a natural control, and to change your standards. I love to point out this picture here of a red bud that has holes all around the edges of its leaves because the leafcutter bee has been cutting out the little circles that it needs to use to make a little cigar-shaped nest out of that leaf that it's cut for its babies. Once I learned that, my opinion of these cutouts changed from being, oh, it's a problem, it's being eaten, to, oh, it's got polka dots now. Natural controls actually have to do with the fact that nature finds a balance. This upper right-hand photo was taken by my nephew in his garden, and it shows a hornworm, which we always hate when a tobacco or tomato hornworm gets onto our tomatoes, because we know that those worms can eat through a whole lot of tomato plant really quickly. But on the back of it, it's got the cocoons of a parasitic wasp that actually laid its eggs in that hornworm. And that hornworm I like to call a dead worm crawling, because it's really kind of disgusting when you hear it, but those parasitic wasps are eating the hornworm from the inside. If an insecticide had been used to kill the hornworm, it also would have not provided all those baby wasps the food. And so the natural control would have been gone. So I really encourage people to change what they think is okay. I think that Doug Tallamy's suggestion of the 10-foot back rule, where you step back 10 feet, and if the plant still looks okay at 10 feet back, maybe the bit of eating that you're finding is not a problem. If you need to use some kind of control, go with non-toxic as much as possible. Water is a great way to get insects off of plants. Use your hand, wash it off. That's not going to linger in the environment, and it's not going to get anything that you don't want to get. The master gardener in me just has to say, if you do use pesticides or herbicides or fertilizer, please always make sure that you read the label very carefully and you follow directions. Do not freestyle with any of these chemicals. They are strong and they should not be used other than as they are prescribed. And I really like this little Facebook meme that I stole. If something is not eating your plants, then your garden is not part of the ecosystem. That may help you feel a little bit better about some of your plants having some insect browse. So what plant would be good for ladybugs? I thought a while and I thought, you know what? I don't know that I've ever seen a swamp milkweed that at some point does not get oleander aphids. Swamp milkweed is part of the Asclepias family, the milkweed family that has about 14 native plants in Virginia. There's even more throughout the country. And it grows 4 to 6 feet high. It has beautiful pink flowers. Of all the different milkweed plants available to us in Northern Virginia, it is the one that can take more shade and wetter soil than other milkweeds. It attracts hummingbirds and native bees, and of course, famously, as all the milkweeds are, is a host for the monarch butterfly, which is really struggling. The populations of this amazing migratory insect are really having trouble. I just saw my first monarch yesterday over at the Glen Carlin Library Garden. I was really happy to see it, but every year I'm really nervous how many are going to come through. The thing is about swamp milkweed is that it is highly prone to attacks from invasive oleander aphids. The oleander aphids are not native here, but they take off and do really well. They're very identifiable by their bright orange color, and they tend to cluster on the swamp milkweed. And believe me, if you've got the oleander aphids, your ladybugs will be very, very happy. We're going to move on to our next animal, the eastern box turtle, which isn't this just a wonderful, handsome picture of this gentleman here? Worldwide, there's over 300 species of turtles. About 57 are native to North America, and we've got 11 different kinds of turtles in the greater DC area. The eastern box turtle is the only land turtle in our area, although it does like moisture and damp places, but it's a land turtle. It does not live in the water. Box turtles are so named because they have a hinged plastron, that's the name for the bottom shell, that allows it to close up tightly with the carapace, the top shell, and just be completely boxed up so that they are not subject to predators when they're in that box. They are quite long-lived. They live 25 to 35 years, but some in captivity have been known to live more than 100 years. So this is a creature that can have a good long life, even though they're quite small, about 4 inches wide by 6 inches long. They have a home range that's usually less than 2 acres. They do not go far out of it. And if they are taken out of it somehow, they will try to return to the home range. And if they can't, they really will never do well and will probably die. They are omnivorous and opportunistic, just taking advantage of almost anything that they can find to eat. But I do find it really interesting that as they get older, they tend to become more vegetarian and less carnivorous. Let's talk about how they make more turtles. The male eastern box turtles, you can tell because they have reddish eyes and the plastron, that under part, is concave. That's so they don't slide off the convex plastron of the female. But I have to say, I find it a little rude to try to lift them up and look at their underside. I think it's better to just look at the eye color and the fact that the male turtles have a more colorful shell than the females, who have a flat or even convex plastron. They reach sexual maturity at around the age of 5. And the mating season is pretty long, spring through fall. But here's the deal. The female turtles can store sperm for up to 4 years if conditions seem to make that appropriate. The females will nest in May and June, and they do so by digging a nest with their hind legs, and they'll lay between 1 and 11 eggs in any given nest, but they may have more than one nest. Now, here's something really fascinating. The temperature affects whether those eggs will be male or female when they hatch out. And warmer temperatures make in these turtles for more females. Now, apparently there are a number of other animals where temperature affects whether the babies will be male or female. And it's not always that warmer means female. It depends on the animal. But it is an interesting fact to remember as our planet warms. Are we going to have some animals that have imbalance between male and female animals? So a few more interesting facts about the turtles in our area. They don't really hibernate, but they do sort of a semi-hibernation in an insulated spot called a hibernaculum. They go lethargic, and in fact, they're in a state called brumation, starting in October or November and lasting into April. But sometimes when it's warm, they get up and kind of wander around and then find another resting spot. I truly believe that this turtle here that I took a picture of, which was in quite early spring, I think that that's what was going on here, because she really was trying to kind of hunker back down in the evening of a warm day. I think she'd gotten up and moved around and was trying to find a good spot to go back into brumation. In hot summers, they also go a little bit less active. During the heat of the day, they try to find cool areas to rest under logs, under leaves, in mud, or in an abandoned burrow of some other creature. Baby turtles are on their own from the time that they hatch. The parents do not have anything to do with raising them. The biggest challenge to the babies is that that hinge that closes them up like a box doesn't really develop until they're 4 or 5 years of age. And so as a result, they can be prey to a variety of other creatures. Their conservation status is vulnerable. So eastern box turtles are not yet endangered, but they are vulnerable. So if you want to be a turtle friend, you can make sure that your yard is a good place for them to be by providing brush piles and native plants and leaves and moist hiding places for them. These are not flashy creatures that want to be seen. They want to move around and be a bit stealthy. I love this picture of this turtle because she looks like she's just trucking. She wants to get across the road and she knows what she's doing. Unfortunately, turtles do not understand automobiles. And so indeed, it's long been a practice of thoughtful, helpful people that if you see a turtle trying to cross a road, you can help it. And the way to do that is to move it simply to the other side of the road where it's heading, facing the same way so that it can go on its way without getting run over. If you try to turn it around on the side where you found it, it's just going to turn right back around because it wants to get to the other side of the road. Do not keep eastern box turtles as pets. The pet trade is really a problem for them. It takes that turtle out of the breeding pool and it's not going to be a happy, fulfilled turtle in your house. It wants to be out doing its turtle thing. Do not paint its shell. I can't believe that people would actually do this, but as I researched, apparently people think it's fun to paint a turtle's shell, bright colors, rainbow, whatever. And the paint itself can damage their lungs and sinuses. And of course, it also destroys their camouflage, which is a really important thing to keep them alive. So just if you ever hear of this, just explain that it's a problem. If you discover a turtle nest, just leave it alone. It doesn't need any help. The mama knows what it's doing. Just leave that nest be. If you find a baby turtle on its own, do not assume it needs your help. Again, baby turtles hatch out and they don't need any help from their parents. So the fact that it's alone doesn't mean that you need to do anything for it. Don't pick it up because you may get it all disoriented. Enjoy looking at it and wish it well on its way. If you do find a turtle that really needs some help, it's got a cracked shell or something obvious. If you are going to take it to be rehabbed, make a really careful note of exactly where it is picked up from, because after its rehabilitation, it needs to go right back to that spot. Remember, they have a territory that they know, and if they get released where they don't know, they probably won't make it. So one of the biggest things you can do to help is remember where you collected it from. Things that you can do to help turtles include leaving the leaves. I'm running a little video here, and this is not of a turtle, it's of a robin. And I'm sorry, some of it gets a little fuzzy because I shot this through my bay window looking down at the robin. But this is an example of how important the native leaves that are still around are for our animals. This is what they depend on. They cannot go to an IKEA store to furnish their home. They must go into nature and find the items that they are used to. Insects overwinter in some stage of development. Most of the Lepidoptera in general use leaf litter for cover, whether it is as a baby, as a pupa, as a mature butterfly or moth. Leaves provide a great mulch for plants. It's the natural thing, what they provide to themselves, and they provide nutrients to the decomposters. Leaves help conserve moisture in the soil. Again, we've been hearing about several different creatures that need to have moist soil. Plant stems provide nesting spaces for other insects, particularly native bees. So if you can leave native plant stems that are the diameter of a pencil or larger and only cut them down to 8 to 24 inches, that will help the bees find good nesting material and spaces. Do wait until full spring and only clean up when you really must. The more I garden, the more I realize that leaving leaves year round without disturbing them really provides a lot of great habitat. I only clean up the leaves where I need to do something rather specific, like plant vegetables. And then what I do is I chop them up and return them to the ground to break down more quickly. This caterpillar on the upper left is one that I found as I was moving leaves around, proving the point that yes, that's what they do. And here's a beautiful nest built of pine needles. And indeed, here's a turtle who's just nestling into those leaves that if I'd pulled them away, that turtle wouldn't have any place to hide. So for a plant that will be helpful to the turtles, I want to talk about the mayapple, but I have to just give a shout out to this particular turtle over here on the right. I was working on this part of my presentation and I was thinking all about turtles when in the morning, before I started making this slide, my husband opened the door at about 6:15 and he said, "Alyssa, there's a turtle on our front porch." And sure enough, this girl was out here. I think she knew I wanted to get a video of a turtle. So I filmed her, and sorry, it's a little bumpy video. But let's talk about the mayaples. They're a wonderful native ephemeral, meaning that it comes up in spring and dies away sometime in the summer. It's not going to make it through the full year, but it's widely spread. It generally forms by colonizing, by sending out rhizomes. And so all the plants that are in that group are all clones of each other, but they depend on turtles to plant their seeds a little ways away in order to have genetically diverse plants. The leaves are held like an umbrella from a stalk. You can see it here. It looks like a closed umbrella. Immature plants have a single stalk, just like a regular umbrella, but the mature plants divide into a Y shape into two canopies, kind of like those golf umbrellas some places make. A single white bloom is formed at the center of the Y and it matures into a small fruit that is yellow when it's ripe. Now, interestingly enough, all parts of that mayapple are toxic except for the ripe fruit. The turtle likes the fruit. It's real tasty. It's a little high up. It'll probably push the plant over a bit in order to get at the mayapple. But by eating it, the fruit and the seed inside it gets scarified. It gets kind of nicked up by the digestion, which makes the seed better able to sprout when it gets pooped out somewhere away from the parent colony. Now, if that is not the plant for you, I've got a bonus plant for you, wild strawberries. These are native strawberries, and I can tell you that they are very tasty when they ripen. They're not very big, but they're very tasty. But I have a hard time getting the ripe ones, maybe because the turtles come eat them. My wild strawberries are planted right by where that turtle was. So we're at another spot for questions.
One attendee commented that this summer they've had lots of aphids, which they've had to wash off with garden hose, and wondered if there were fewer aphid predators because of drought.
That's a really good question, and that may be the case. I am unfortunately not a scientist currently studying these sorts of things, but that could indeed be a problem. And sometimes things just get out of balance. If there's anyone else on this program that knows, I'd love them to answer, but if nobody does answer, I will try to ask somebody who may know.
Someone asked how to get rid of Asian lady beetles or ladybugs safely.
That's a tricky one, and I don't know that I have heard of a really good way to do it. You shouldn't use an insecticide because it's going to kill everything else. Certainly, if you have it in you to recognize the Asian ones and dispose of them, put them in something. You could have a cup that has some fluid or even an insecticide in there, and collect them and throw them out that way. You could do that. And certainly by knowing that M formation on their forehead, that would help you know which one is which. Other than that, unless they come inside, which I already talked about, you can vacuum them up into a stocking and knot the end of the stocking and throw them out, which will dispose of them.
Sort of following up on your the leaves pitch, someone asked when it's okay to start mowing after a no-mow May, which they assume is beneficial for creatures.
Certainly a no-mow May is a great idea, and I'm glad that this person is aware of it. Obviously, if it's no-mow May, start in June. Here's the truth of the matter. Lawns are not great for our native insects. And so if you really, really want to help insects, the best thing to do is to shrink your lawn and have less area that needs to be mowed. Use some alternative species. I'm not saying that lightheartedly. I actually believe that lawns are quite important for people who have children who play on the lawns. I'm not making a blanket statement, get rid of your lawns, but there is no perfect moment that will say, oh, if you mow in such and such a month, there will be nothing harmed by it. It's always a balancing act. You can help mitigate the negatives and raise the positives by having longer blades on your lawn, by having less lawn and more other kinds of plants where the insects can safely live.
There was another question on leaf litter. Do you need to leave the leaves on the grass or can you rake them into your beds?
You know what? That ties very closely to the previous question, because truly lawns are not going to benefit from leaves on them unless you have a mulching mower that chops them up and breaks them down enough so that they become mulch. So if you're talking large leaves, rake them into the beds. And what Douglas Tallamy always says is, if your beds aren't big enough to accommodate all those leaves, increase the size of your bed.
There was one question about whether there are any laws on mosquito spraying. This person mentioned that their HOA contracts with a spraying company to deal with mosquitoes and wonders if there are any laws about the spraying.
I am not aware of laws that prohibit spraying. I believe there are some laws or guidelines, and I'm not truly sure if there's any penalties for breaking this, but I know that there's guidelines that mosquito spraying should not be done when there is a lot of breeze, because that will carry the insecticide beyond the target area. I am not aware of limitations on the ability to spray at all. I can look into that. If I find something more on that, I'll post it when we post the video overall. Same with some of these other questions.
Well, Kasha, who also gave one of the talks on mosquitoes, mentioned that Fairfax County and Alexandria both support mosquito spraying. She just put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Someone's worried that climate change may result in fewer male turtles.
It may. It absolutely may. There is a chance that this will happen and that the gender balance will get out of whack. I hate to say this. It makes it sound like I'm prejudiced towards females. It would be better to have fewer males than females, because one male can potentially impregnate a bunch of females, whereas a female can only carry so many babies. So we would hope that it would go that way if there is a change, but who knows? So I hope nobody is too squeamish about spiders, but this is, I think, a really cool spider, and one that we see with some frequency in our garden, partly because it's so visible. The yellow garden spider has a number of different names that we may know it by. Most of the ones that we see are the females, because the males are so much smaller than the females. They are about a quarter the size of the females, and they don't have the bright colors that the females do. They are native to North America, although they extend down to Central America. They prefer edge habitats, which essentially that's what a suburban garden is. It really mimics having both trees and meadowy type areas. So we can see these in our yards with some frequency. The webs are really quite big. They can be up to 2 feet in diameter. And the really notable thing about them is their zigzag pattern called a stabilimentum, but scientists are not sure as to exactly why it's there. The most common hypothesis is that it's to help birds see the web and not fly into the web, which would ruin the web for the spider. We've got look at what spiders do, how they live their lives. They are crepuscular, meaning that they are out at dawn and twilight primarily. They usually build their webs at night, and they often, if the web is damaged, they're going to eat the web and get the nutrients from the web to help them regenerate the web. They are predators, and they primarily like dragonflies, damselflies, wasps, and bees, but they'll eat all sorts of things. Now, I am going to apologize to everyone because I will forever be sorry that I did not get my camera up more quickly to film this spider. The moment I saw it, I was with someone, we were gardening together, and we suddenly saw this great motion, and this spider rushed over and spun around this bee that had just flown into her web and twisted her around. If you have seen Lord of the Rings, it was just like Shelob encapsulating Frodo. It was so dramatic. We just watched and tried to get my camera up, and I only got the end of it, but it is a very dramatic thing. They rest in the center of the web, waiting for vibrations. And when the prey kind of stops moving, they go over and encase them in the webbing. And then they envenomate them, which I just love that word. They envenomate them by biting them, which liquefies their internal organs so that the spider can eat the prey. However, spider venom is not a danger to humans unless you're a human who happens to be allergic to spider venom. Basically, it feels very similar to a bee sting, which, grant you, isn't pleasant. I'm not saying I would want to be bitten by this spider, but it would not liquefy my internal organs. Luckily, yellow garden spiders are not aggressive, and they tend to flee from humans. They really only bite if you're really bugging them and being aggressive towards them. How they raise their babies. I just love this fact that male yellow garden spiders court the female by plucking at her web. I think that's just so adorable. You know, I don't know if he's like a little nervous, hey, hey, look at me, or if she likes the vibration or what, but I think it's a charming courtship ritual. The mothers attack an egg sac beneath the vegetation or sometimes onto the web. The babies hatch in late summer or autumn, or sometimes they remain dormant in the egg sac through the winter if it's really cold. The egg sacs are heavily parasitized by wasps and flies. So there's a little cross eating here between the spiders and the wasps. The baby yellow garden spiders, when they are ready to move on and find a new area to make a home, they release some silk, and the wind will catch them and carry them to another location, which is called ballooning. I also find it quite charming that the webs that the babies build are usually quite small, and that as the spider grows, it will build bigger webs. Yellow garden spiders live about a year. The females usually die after the first frost after mating, but if it's mild climate, they can live longer. The males, unfortunately, apparently their whole purpose in life is just to mate, and then they die. If we want to support yellow garden spiders, there are some things that we can do. Fortunately, the yellow garden spider populations are stable. They're not endangered, but there are 16 different species of spiders in North America that are endangered. And so many of these practices are good for those endangered ones too. So seems like I've already said this, don't use pesticides, which will kill their food, but also may hurt the spiders. Spiders are not insects, and so therefore are not as prone, but you put enough of a chemical on them and they could die too. Providing abundant native plants that are the basis of a healthy ecosystem will help the spiders and the insects that the spiders need to eat. If you're in a garden with lots of plants, try to avoid the webs. Look for those webs, especially in the morning. We know they weave their webs overnight, so try not to just blunder through them. The spider will be happier and you'll be happier too. It seems to be something that so many people are afraid of spiders, and it's very normalized. Like, who would like a spider? But the fact of the matter is that they are a wonderful, efficient, non-polluting form of a pesticide. Spiders consume 400 to 8 million tons of insects every year. So fight the phobia in yourself. Remind yourself that these spiders are not after you, that they are helping the environment. Other common spiders in our area include various kinds of orb weavers and jumping spiders and crab spiders, wolf spiders, cellar spiders, and nursery web spiders. I've got a picture here of a goldenrod crab spider, which leads me right to our recommended plant. And this is a keystone plant that's at the top of the perennial heap of plants, and that is our goldenrod. And we have a number of different kinds of goldenrod, 10 in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Depending on the kind, it can grow pretty tall, up to 6.5 feet, but you can cut it back until early July if you want it to be more compact. Collectively, these solidagos or goldenrods support 150 species of Lepidoptera. Do not confuse it with ragweed, which causes hay fever. People think it's the same thing, and it's not at all. Goldenrod is pollinated by pollinators, whereas ragweed is wind pollinated, which is why the pollen is so abundant and on the air and can cause problems. Makes for a wonderful late season show. Deer don't usually damage it. And there's a tried and true fact sheet for Solidago rugosa. On to Dekay's brown snakes, which I have to say, this photo is of the first Dekay's brown snake that I ever met. It happened to be the last species that we needed at the Glen Carlin Library Garden to become Audubon at Home certified. And I was pulling apart some stacked plastic window boxes in order to plant them in spring. And here was this little guy, and I thought at first he was a kind of a big earthworm, but he wasn't. I could tell by the way he held himself. And he's so tiny, but so fierce. And I just absolutely adored him. And that's when I fell in love with the brown snake. They have a number of different names. In Virginia, we've got about 30 native plant species, 19 in Northern Virginia. The only locally venomous snake is the northern copperhead. The Dekay snake is very secretive, which is why we don't see much of it, even though it is the most common snake in the National Capital area. And its range is across most of the eastern United States. The adults have gray-brown backs with darker spots that fade towards the tail and sometimes have a darker head. At largest, they can be 19 inches, but adults are usually 9 to 13 inches, so not very big at all. So what the snakes are like through their lives, they give live birth to babies that are the size of a matchstick. I find that fact just adorable. The babies are darker in color and have a cream or yellow band around their neck, like this upper picture of the snake. They eat slugs and snails and soft-bodied insects and earthworms. So this is a good critter to have in your yard if you've got problems with slugs and snails. They are completely harmless to humans. They may release a bad smell, they may pretend to strike, or sometimes they even play dead, just hoping to get you to go away. They form aggregations sometimes where there's a small group of them, but mostly in winter. This is an aggregation over here. Dekay's brown snakes are often eaten by free-ranging domestic cats, by other snakes, birds, raccoons, and possums, and their populations have declined in recent years, presumably because of habitat destruction and the use of pesticides, which kills their prey. So, how to be a friend to a Dekay's brown snake? Again, they're very secretive, they're nocturnal. Usually, if you're going to find them, it's when you move a board or under trash or logs or rocks. They live primarily in the soil humus layer. So, this one over here I found when I was sucking up some leaves in my vegetable area, and you can see this is the size of my extension cord, the utility cord. And you can see he's much smaller even than the cord. So this guy is really small. Again, I thought he was a big earthworm at first, but he moved differently. We can protect their habitat by leaving fallen branches or creating brush piles. This is a brush pile over here. They're easy to create, and it's actually very convenient so that when limbs fall in your yard, you just put them there and don't have to worry about disposing of them otherwise. I just saw a video last week of someone who was doing this as an internal fence on their property, and it looked really cool, actually. It was a nice looking creation. And keeping cats indoors can help the snakes. Usually we talk about that with birds, but keeping cats indoors would help the snakes too. So plants that can help the Dekay snake. Any low-growing shrub that creates an environment where leaves gather would work. So I chose the Grow Low fragrant sumac. This is mine on my property here, or actually just next door. I planted them, but it's next door to my property. And it's created this lovely ground cover that is really quite pretty, grows to about 3 feet. The leaves can sometimes be mistaken for poison ivy because they grow in clusters. I certainly thought it was poison ivy the first time I saw it, but I've gotten used to it and I can tell the difference easily now. It tolerates clay soil and is really good for drought and good for erosion control. Arlington County has started using it extensively in street side plantings. Columbia Pike, close to me, where there's some new plantings, has a lot of the Grow Low sumac. We've got a bonus plant for you if that's not the plant for you. Itea is a wonderful plant in Virginia. It has cultivars in various sizes if you need smaller shrubs, and it also forms by spreading from the roots. And if that's not the plant for you, Christmas fern would be a great plant. This was pointed out by Rachel Tolman when she was reviewing this talk with me, and she said, you know, Christmas fern would be really great because the leaves are evergreen. They kind of flop over in winter and they capture a lot of leaves under them. And so that would be great habitat for a little Dekay snake under that plant. Our last creature is the praying mantis. And look at that face. How can you not love that face? So praying mantises, there are more than 1,500 species of mantids worldwide. Mantids are the entire order. Mantis genus is part of that order. They have front legs that fold up in an unusual stance that looks like they're praying. They have a wonderful triangular head to swivel. That they can move around and they can look over their shoulder, which other insects are not able to do. Females generally are larger than the males, considerably often. All mantises are predators. They will feed on anything they can catch, included smaller mantids, which makes them cannibals. And their indiscriminate predation makes their value as pest control questionable because they will absolutely eat the insects and problem creatures that you want gone, but they'll eat the good ones too. So it's really unclear whether they're a good thing or not to have. The Carolina mantis is the only one that is native to Virginia. This is the dramatic slide, Love Hurts. Sometimes praying mantis females practice sexual cannibalism, especially if the female is undernourished. And what that means is that during mating, she'll turn around and eat the head of the male that is mating with her, but does not seem to deter him. He can keep going for quite some time. And apparently, the extra protein means that their offspring are more likely to survive. So it is thought that the males are not too terribly unhappy to give up their life if their offspring will survive better. Sexual cannibalism is not unique to mantises. It's practiced by other sorts of creatures. This is not the only one, but it is one of the more interesting examples of weird mating behaviors. We have our local Carolina mantis. The females are, of course, bigger, and at biggest, they are 2.5 inches long. And I want you to remember that number. It's an important number. The females always have bulkier bodies than the male. They are gray, brown, green in order to kind of camouflage themselves. Apparently, the nymphs in each stage can change their color depending on their environment. On our local mantises, the wings only extend 3/4 of the way down the abdomen, which is really notable characteristic for our local ones. The females cannot fly, but the males absolutely can. They have a dark dot on each of their outer wings, and the Carolina mantises are found throughout the United States, all the way down to Brazil. Now, we've got interlopers. We've got Chinese mantises, which are becoming a problem. The Chinese mantises were brought to America accidentally, but since then have been imported deliberately as predators and for the pet trade. They are way bigger than our Carolina mantises. The female Chinese mantises can be 5 inches in length. Remember, ours are 2.5, so this is twice as big. The most distinctive difference is that her wings will reach the entire length of her abdomen. A Chinese mantis egg case, which is called an ootheca for all mantises, looks kind of like a tan toasted marshmallow and is almost as big as a ping pong ball. We also have European mantises around here, not as many as the Chinese mantises, but they're also competing with our Carolina mantises. And they can be up to 3.5 inches long, so also bigger than our 2.5-inch Carolina mantis. Their ootheca is more like our Carolina mantises, but it's not as flattened or smooth, and it has no stripes. These two introduced mantises are outcompeting the Carolina mantis for food sources and prey on the Carolina mantis frequently. Now, this is a visual so you can see the differences between the oothecas. And the ones I want you to notice are on the far left, the Carolina mantis, ours, and you can see it's quite small and it has distinctive stripes. The two other oothecas that you are likely to find are the Chinese mantis, and you see how round it is. We said it looked like a toasted marshmallow. And here's the European mantis, which is also long, but it does not have stripes and it's just tan. So, how to help the Carolina mantis? Do not purchase Chinese or European ootheca for pest control or to hatch as pets. If you find a non-native ootheca, usually you would find it in winter or early May, you can destroy them and you can cut through them, crush them, or submerge them in water, or maybe one or more of the above. This is a Chinese mantis that I cut through here. We made a little video of it on the MGMV website that you can see under the Glen Carlin Library Garden videos. If you aren't sure about your identification, you're thinking, oh, maybe it's the wrong, I don't want to destroy the wrong thing. These days, with the iNaturalist app or other ability to Google images, you can confirm the identification pretty easily. And the other thing that you can do to help the Carolina mantis is to plant native plants that support the insects they eat. Now, we're just going to run down, since the mantis is the last creature that I'm presenting, some of the practices that we've talked about, because a lot of them overlap. Cutting down on light pollution, eliminating pesticides, mow high, leave the leaves, don't disturb the soil, plant native plants, create safe shelter, keep cats indoors, keep feeders clean, don't purchase and release the non-natives, create brush piles, don't keep as a pet, create rock piles, and destroy non-native eggs. Couple of good practices that I just feel I need to mention, even though they didn't apply to these particular creatures, is offering clean water is really important to almost all birds. Keeping snags. A snag is a dead tree that hasn't fallen over, and snags really create a lot of life for insects, and birds can feed on them. You can cut a snag off at a height so that even if it does fall over, it isn't dangerous, but snags have a lot of important value to wildlife. And the last one is to remove invasive plants, which there's full presentations. I've given a full presentation on removing invasive plants, but it's really in many ways the flip side of planting native plants. The point is, our native animals need native plants. And when the invasive plants crowd them out, there's no room for the native plants. Then I needed to figure out a plant for the mantises, and I had a challenge with that because they really don't eat plants. So I thought, you know what? We need to just say plant anything native, because our native plants create the supportive, sustaining ecosystem for all our native creatures. And I thought I'd talk about how to identify a great native plant for your garden. And the lucky thing is that we have some wonderful information available here in Northern Virginia. Not everybody has the information so readily available. First of all, we have the MGMV tried and true plant selections. This is a sample of one. I've given a live link for you, and it gives a lot of in-depth information, wonderful photos. It suggests what it can be a good replacement for, the invasives that it can replace. The other great source that we have is the Plant Nova Natives website and book. You can buy the book, but on the website, you can also download the book for free. And that website is a treasure trove full of wonderful information about native plants and native habitat. And I recommend, if you have not visited it yet, please do so soon. Lastly, we've got resources. If any of these things have intrigued you and you want to dig deeper, I'm not going to read through all the resources, but I can tell you that they're all really good. So any of them that seem interesting, you've got the live link. Just take a few minutes and navigate around. And I do want to take one moment to give 3 different people special shout outs. If you thought that the photos in this presentation were good, that thanks all goes to Judy Gallagher for her wonderful creature photos, which she so generously shared with me, and Elaine Mills, who gave me wonderful plant photos always. She's always supportive and gave me great advice and moral support. And Rachel Tolman, one of our local naturalists, who was kind enough to help review this presentation with me, so I did not make any amateur errors. And that brings us, well, I should mention my sister, who also gave me some mantis pictures and a few other photos around. Anyway, but that brings us to the final questions.
Thank you, Alyssa. There was just one that I think Julie in some ways has covered with all her references about what to look for in a cultivar, or are there things you should avoid in a cultivar?
Oh, great. Yeah, I'll go over that really quickly. Cultivars mean that they are a selection either by natural occurring or by man-made, manipulation. And there can be problems if there is a change in the leaf color, which will make the plant less palatable to a native insect, or to the flower either the color or even more so the center of the flower, the ability for the insect to reach the nectaries where it needs to get in to sip the nectar and move the pollen around. There are flowers that have been bred to be double, and it makes it much harder to get at those nectaries, so it's of no value to the insect anymore.
We're getting lots and lots and lots of thank yous and talks about how wonderful this was. And I would just second that. I think you were brave to do a creature feature when usually all we talk about is plants. And I just want to thank you and just say that we all learned so much about things that we don't think about that often. And we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I genuinely believe we cannot separate our native plants from our native creatures. So it has been just a pleasure doing this.